Hi everyone, welcome back to Moonlight Mysteries. I'm your host, Jackie Mage, and today I have part 1 of famous alien abduction stories from people who have claimed to be abducted by extraterrestrials. This video is different from the others, being part of my new story series. So grab your favorite snack, sit back and relax while we once again dive into all things mysterious, paranormal, fantastical, supernatural, and otherworldly. Enjoy! First, we have the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. On September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were returning to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire from a vacation in Niagara Falls in Montreal. At around 10:30 p.m., they were driving through the White Mountains when Betty noticed a bright point of light in the sky. Initially thinking it was a falling star, she soon realized it was moving erratically. Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look, and he pulled over at a scenic picnic area. Using binoculars, they observed a craft with multiple colored lights that appeared to be rotating. As the objects moved closer, Barney, a World War II veteran, noted that it did not behave like any aircraft he was familiar with. They continued driving on Route 3, and the objects seemed to follow them. They stopped again at Indian Head to observe the craft, which descended in their direction. Barney got out of the car, armed with a pistol, and walked into a field to get a closer look. Through the binoculars, he claimed to see humanoid figures peering at him from the windows of the craft. Terrified, he ran back to the car, shouting to Betty that they're going to capture us. As they sped away, the Hills heard a series of rhythmic beeping and buzzing sounds. Their car vibrated, and they felt a tingling sensation pass through their bodies. A second series of beeps and buzzes returned them to full consciousness, and they found themselves 35 miles south of where they had initially encountered the craft. When they arrived home, it was early morning on September 20th. Both felt unwell and had peculiar sensations running through their bodies. Barney had a feeling of strangeness, and Betty noticed her dress was torn and had a pink powder on it. Their watches had stopped working, and neither could recall specific details of the missing time. In the days following the incident, Betty reported experiencing vivid dreams in which she and Barney were taken aboard a spacecraft by a small, gray-skinned being who performed medical examinations on them. Betty's dreams were extremely detailed and recurred for 5 consecutive nights before stopping. Disturbed by their experience, the Hills reported their encounter to Pease Air Force Base, though they omitted some details to avoid being labeled as eccentric. Their report eventually reached Project Blue Book, the Air Force's UFO investigation program. Betty also began reading UFO books from the library, which led her to contact the NICAP, known as the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. NICAP investigator Walter Webb met with the Hills and found them to be sincere. However, the couple still struggled with anxiety and confusion over the incident. In 1963, the Hills sought the help of Dr. Benjamin Simon, a Boston-based psychiatrist and neurologist who specialized in hypnosis. Over several months, Dr. Simon conducted hypnotic regression sessions with both Betty and Barney, separately. Under hypnosis, both described similar experiences of being taken aboard a spacecraft by humanoid beings, although their recollections varied in some details. Barney recalled being led into the spacecraft, where he was laid on a table and examined by the beings. He described the beings as having large eyes, small noses, and slits for mouths. Barney's descriptions under hypnosis revealed deep anxiety and fear, particularly when recalling the eyes of the beings. Betty's hypnosis sessions corroborated her dreams. She recalled a leader figure who communicated with her in English, showing her a star map and discussing the origins of the beings. She also described undergoing medical examinations, including the insertion of a long needle into her navel, which she was told was a pregnancy test. One of the most intriguing aspects of Betty's account was her recollection of a star map shown to her by the alien leader. Under hypnosis, she drew the map, which consisted of several stars connected by lines and a few others scattered around. In the late 1960s, amateur astronomer Marjorie Fish attempted to match the map with known star systems and concluded that it depicted the Zeta Reticuli system. This claim was controversial and remains debated amongst ufologists and skeptics. The Hill story gained widespread attention when journalist John G. Fuller wrote a book about their experiences, The Interrupted Journey, published in 1966. The book included details from the hypnosis sessions and Betty's star map. In 1975, their story was dramatized in the television movie The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones as Barney and Estelle Parsons as Betty. Critics argue that their experiences could be explained by psychological factors, including sleep paralysis and hallucinations. Some suggest that their memories were influenced by contemporary science fiction and media portrayals of extraterrestrials. For instance, the appearance of the aliens in Betty's dream and Barney's hypnosis sessions bore striking similarities to the aliens depicted in the episode of The Outer Limits that aired shortly before their hypnosis sessions. Despite the skepticism, the Betty and Barney Hill abduction remains one of the most famous and well-documented UFO cases. It introduced many elements that would become staples in subsequent abduction reports, such as missing time, medical examinations, and communication with extraterrestrial beings. The case has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and studies on the psychological and cultural aspects of UFO encounters. The Hills story continues to be a cornerstone of UFO and alien abduction research, symbolizing the complex interplay between personal experience, cultural narratives, and the enduring mystery of whether we are alone in the universe. The next story is the Travis Walton abduction. Travis Walton was a 22-year-old logger working with a 7-man logging crew led by Mike Rogers. The crew was working on a contract to thin out underbrush in the Apache Sigreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona. The incident took place on November 5, 1975, and has since become one of the most famous and controversial UFO abduction cases in history. On the evening of November 5, 1975, at around 6 p.m., Walton and his 6 co-workers, which included Mike Rogers, Ken Peterson, John Goulet, Stephen Pierce, Dwayne Smith, and Alan Dallas, were driving home in a pickup truck after a long day's work in the forest. As they drove along a remote dirt road, they noticed a bright light in the trees ahead. Initially, they thought it might be a plane crash or a fire. As they approached, they saw a large, glowing, saucer-shaped object hovering about 15 feet above the ground. The craft emitted a high-pitched sound and was surrounded by a bright blue-green light. Intrigued and against the advice of his coworkers, Travis Walton jumped out of the truck and ran towards the object to get a closer look. Walton's coworkers yelled at him to come back, but he continued to approach the craft. When he was just a few feet away, he reportedly stood in a clearing, looking up at the object. Suddenly, a beam of blue light shot out from the craft, hitting Walton and lifting him several feet into the air before throwing him backward violently onto the ground. His body went limp and fell to the ground motionless. Terrified after believing Walton had died, the crew panicked and sped away in the truck. After driving a short distance, they stopped and debated whether to go back and help Walton. Mike Rogers, the crew leader, decided they had to return, but when they got back to the site, there was no trace of Walton or the craft. Fearing for their safety and unsure what to do, they decided to report the incident to the authorities. The crew reported the incident to Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison. Initially skeptical, Ellison interviewed the visibly shaken men and began to believe they were sincere. The next day, Sheriff Marlon Gillespie launched a full-scale search for Walton, involving dozens of volunteers, law enforcement officers, and tracking dogs. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of Walton was found. 5 days after his disappearance, Walton reappeared on the night of November 10, 1975. He was found at a gas station in Heber, Arizona, approximately 30 miles from the location of his disappearance. Walton was disoriented, confused, and had a 5-day growth of beard. He claimed to have no memory of the past few days and believed only a few hours had passed since the encounter. In the weeks following his return, Walton began to recall details of his experience through a series of hypnosis sessions conducted by Dr. James Harder, a UFO researcher, and Dr. William H. Sprinkle, a psychologist specializing in UFO encounters. Under hypnosis, Walton described being taken aboard the craft by small humanoid beings with large heads and eyes. He recalled being in a sterile, hospital-like room and being subjected to various medical examinations. Walton also described encountering other human-like beings on the craft who communicated with him and escorted him to the different areas of the ship. He claimed to have been shown a large room with a chair that had controls which he attempted to operate. Eventually, he was escorted off the craft and found himself standing on a highway in Heber, Arizona, where he was later picked up. Both Walton and his coworkers were subjected to polygraph tests to determine the truthfulness of their accounts. Initially, the results were inconclusive or showed signs of deception, leading to skepticism about their story. However, subsequent polygraphs conducted by experts, including one arranged by the National Enquirer in 1976, indicated that Walton and his coworkers were telling the truth. Despite the polygraph results and Walton's detailed account, many skeptics have questioned the validity of the abduction story. Critics argue that the incident could have been a hoax or a hallucination induced by stress, fatigue, or other psychological factors. Some have suggested that Walton may have fabricated the story for financial gain or publicity. Others have pointed to the inconsistencies in the accounts of Walton and his coworkers, as well as the lack of physical evidence to support their claims. The involvement of UFO researchers and the media has also led some to question the objectivity of the investigation. Despite the controversy, the Travis Walton abduction remains one of the most famous and well-documented UFO cases. In 1978, Walton published a book about his experiences titled The Walton Experience, which was later adapted into the 1993 movie Fire in the Sky. The case has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and investigations, and continues to be a topic of interest and debate among UFO enthusiasts and skeptics alike. Travis Walton has maintained his account of the abduction and continues to speak publicly about his experience, contributing to the ongoing fascination with one of the most compelling UFO abduction stories ever reported. Our next story is the Pascagoula abduction. The Pascagoula abduction is one of the most famous UFO abduction cases involving two men, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, who claim to have been taken aboard an alien spacecraft on the evening of October 11, 1973. The incident took place on the banks of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi and has since become a cornerstone of UFO lore. On the evening of October 11, 1973, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, 42 and 19, decided to go fishing on the Pascagoula River. They chose a spot near an old abandoned shipyard where they hoped to catch some fish and unwind after work. At around 9 p.m. while they were fishing, the two men noticed a strange, bluish light reflecting off the water. They turned around and saw a large oval-shaped craft descending. The craft emitted a bright light and made a hissing noise as it approached, eventually hovering about 2 feet above the ground, roughly 30 feet away from where they stood. Three strange creatures emerged from the craft. Hickson and Parker described the beings as roughly humanoid in shape but unlike anything they had ever seen. The creatures were about 5 feet tall, with bullet-shaped heads and no visible necks. The skin appeared pale and wrinkled, almost as if they were covered in elephant-like skin. They had long arms, and their hands ended in claw-like appendages. The beings floated rather than walked and moved toward the men. Calvin Parker, terrified, fainted almost immediately. Charles Hickson, though paralyzed with fear, remained conscious. Hickson later described feeling a sense of numbness as the creatures grabbed him and floated him toward the craft. Inside the craft, Hickson found himself in a brightly lit room. He was suspended in midair and unable to move. A device resembling a large eye, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, emerged from the wall and began to examine him, moving up and down his body. The entire examination process took only a few minutes, after which Hickson was floated back outside the craft and left standing on the riverbank. Parker's account, revealed years later, described a similar experience. He remembered being taken into a different room where he was also examined. The examination was painful, and he felt as though he was being pricked all over his body. Unlike Hickson, Parker remembered being laid on a slanted table during the procedure. After the creatures released them, the two men watched as the craft ascended and disappeared into the night sky. Shaken and disoriented, Hickson and Parker decided to report the incident to the authorities. They first considered going to a local newspaper, but ultimately chose to contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. At the Sheriff's Office, they were interrogated by Captain Glenn Ryder and Sheriff Fred Diamond. Initially skeptical, the officers left Hickson and Parker alone in a room with a hidden tape recorder to capture their private conversation. To their surprise, the recording revealed the men were genuinely terrified and confused by what had happened, reinforcing the credibility of their story. News of the abduction quickly spread, and the story was picked up by the Associated Press. Hickson and Parker became local celebrities, although Parker in particular was deeply traumatized and reluctant to discuss the event. Both men were subjected to polygraph tests, which indicated they were being truthful about their experiences. Despite the intense public scrutiny, Hickson and Parker stuck to their story. Hickson, more open to speaking with the media, participated in numerous interviews and even wrote a book about the experience called UFO Contact at Pascagoula, published in 1983. Both men underwent hypnosis sessions with various investigators, including Dr. James Harder of the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization and Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a prominent UFO researcher. Under hypnosis, they provided consistent accounts of the abduction, further bolstering their credibility in the eyes of many ufologists. As with most UFO abduction cases, the Pascagoula incident faced significant skepticism. Critics argue that the men could have fabricated the story for attention, or that their experiences were a result of hallucinations or sleep paralysis. Some pointed out inconsistencies in their accounts, although these were relatively minor. Skeptics also noted that Hickson had a history of embellishing stories and had been known to enjoy attention. However, the sheer terror and trauma exhibited by Parker lent weight to their story, as he consistently avoided publicity and expressed a desire to move on from the event. Despite the controversy, the Pascagoula abduction remains one of the most intriguing UFO cases. In the years following the incident, both Hickson and Parker continued to stand by their story. Hickson passed away in 2011, but Parker eventually broke his silence in the 1990s, reaffirming the details of the encounter. In 1918, Parker published his own book called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story. It provided additional insights into his experiences and the profound impact the abduction had on his life. The Pascagoula case continues to be a subject of interest and debate among UFO researchers and enthusiasts, serving as a pivotal example of the abduction phenomenon and its complexities. Our last story is of the Allagash abductions. The Allagash abductions are amongst the most famous and well-documented UFO abductions. They involved 4 men, Jim Weiner, Jack Weiner, Chuck Rack, and Charlie Foltz, who claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials during a camping trip in the Allagash Wilderness Waterway in Maine. The incident occurred in August of 1976 and has since been the subject of numerous investigations and media coverage. They aim to spend 2 weeks exploring the area, fishing, and enjoying the outdoors. The first unusual event happened on the second night of their trip. While night fishing on Eagle Lake, they noticed a bright light in the sky. Initially thinking it was a helicopter or aircraft, they soon realized it was something more extraordinary, as it made no noise and moved erratically. The light seemed to be following them and grew brighter as it approached. After a few minutes it disappeared, leaving the men puzzled but not overly concerned. A few nights later, on August 20th, 1976, the 4 men decided to go night fishing again on Eagle Lake. To attract fish, they built a large bonfire on the shore. As they fished, they noticed the same bright light they'd seen earlier. This time, it approached rapidly and hovered over the lake. The light intensified, and a beam of light shot out of the craft, enveloping the men in their canoe. This is where their memories became fragmented. They recalled feeling paralyzed and being floated into the craft. They described a sense of timelessness and disorientation. The next thing they remembered was being back on the shore, feeling exhausted and disoriented. The bonfire, which should have been burning brightly, was reduced to embers, indicating that several hours had passed, though it seemed like only minutes to them. After the incident, the men returned to their camp, but did not initially discuss what had happened. They all experienced feelings of unease and had trouble sleeping. Over the years, they began experiencing disturbing dreams and flashbacks. These dreams included vivid images of strange beings, medical examinations, and feelings of helplessness. In the early 1980s, Jim Weiner suffered a head injury and began experiencing severe seizures. During his medical treatment, he confided in a neurologist about the strange dreams and the UFO sighting. The neurologist suggested to contact a UFO researcher. This led the men to Dr. Raymond Fowler, a well-known UFO investigator. Fowler suggested regressive hypnosis to help uncover any hidden memories. Each of the 4 men underwent hypnosis separately, and their accounts were strikingly similar. They all described being taken aboard a spacecraft by humanoid beings with large eyes and long limbs. They recounted being subjected to various medical examinations, including the extraction of bodily fluids and tissue samples. Jim described being placed on a table and examined by several beings. He recalled a device being placed over his chest and a feeling of intense pressure. Jack remembered seeing his brother and friends lying on tables in a large room. He also described a painful procedure involving a needle. Chuck's account included detailed descriptions of the interior of the craft and the equipment used by the beings. He recalled feeling a deep sense of fear and helplessness. Charlie described a similar experience, including the sensation of being floated into the craft and subjected to medical examinations. The Allagash abductions gained widespread attention after Raymond Fowler published the case in his book, The Allagash Abductions, in 1993. The men appeared on various television shows and at UFO conferences to share their story. Their detailed and consistent accounts, along with their willingness to undergo hypnosis and polygraph tests, lent credibility to their claims. As with most UFO abduction cases, the Allagash incident faced skepticism. Critics argue that the men could have fabricated their story for attention or financial gain. Some suggested that their shared memories were the result of a collective hallucination or false memories induced by hypnosis. However, the men maintained that they had nothing to gain from their story, and that the experience profoundly affected their lives. Their accounts have been supported by the consistency of their separate hypnosis sessions and the absence of any clear motive of deception. The Allagash abductions remain one of the most compelling UFO abduction cases due to the detailed and corroborated accounts of the 4 men involved. Their story continues to be a significant point of interest in UFO research and has contributed to the broader understanding of the abduction phenomenon. In the years since the incident, the men have continued to stand by their accounts. While skeptics remain, the Allagash abductions have left an incredible mark on the field of ufology and the ongoing debate about the existence of extraterrestrial life and its interactions with humanity. Thank you all for watching, and please tune in to part 2 of Alien Abductions coming out in a few days, where I tell 5 more famous UFO stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Moonlight Mysteries if you like this content, and turn on the notification bell to get notified right when I release videos. If you guys have any interesting UFO abduction stories of your own, or any creepy stories in general, please leave them in the comments section below, and one day I might tell your stories in a future video. Bye!